Welcome, everyone, to the Tom's Hardware Show. I'm Jared Walton, and I'm here with our senior editor, Andrew Friedman. He
Hello.
is he has tested and used the Aya Next Neo, no, Aya Neo Next
There you
Pro,
go.
and we'll be talking about that today and making comparisons to the Steam Deck. But let's go ahead and roll the intro. If I can get my mouse to work. There. You ever lose your mouse cursor? It's
Only
like
only every time I have a meeting.
where's my mouse cursor? I couldn't even see it. The joys of 4K. So, we are talking about the Aya Next Neo,
I
and
next.
there's Aya Neo Next, yes. There's several variants of it available, right? Like the Pro is the top model, or
Right. So there's several variants of it. There's the regular IO Neo Next, and then there was an alternate model called the Advanced, and then the Pro is a top model that boosts the RAM up to 32 gigabytes and has 2 terabytes of SSD storage.
2 terabytes. So that's like 4 times as much as the Steam Deck.
As much as the
So
top Steam Deck, yeah.
yes, as much as the top Steam Deck, which could theoretically be upgraded, but the Steam Deck uses the M.2 2242 SSD
Yeah,
size. Is that right?
they use the shorter SSDs in there.
Yeah, so getting more than 512 gigabyte is kind of difficult, especially if you want something that still performs well. Let's go ahead and let's see. Uh, there we go. So there's an image of it. We'll skip by that for a second and hop straight to the specs. So this is your Aya Next Pro.
They say
It's
that
got
five
the
times fast.
yeah, it's got the Ryzen 7 5825U. So the big deal there, if you're talking Steam Deck comparisons, which I've got the Steam Deck specs on the next slide, but
Right.
we're looking at an 8-core 16-thread CPU running at 2.0 to 4.5 gigahertz, depending on what you're doing. So
Right.
it's a 15-watt CPU still, but it's quite potent as far as mobile or portable CPUs go. But the catch is, and so let me just flip back and forth here to show this. So this is your Steam Deck, 4-core, 8-thread. Clock speeds are a little bit higher on the minimum, lower on the maximum for the Steam Deck, but the
Right.
big one is the second one. So the
Right.
Steam Deck comes with your RDNA 2 8 compute units running at 1.0 to 1.6 gigahertz. The Aya Neo Next, because it's using an off-the-shelf CPU, basically. Valve paid for a custom silicon from AMD, but Aya is just using an off-the-shelf 5825U, and so they got Vega 8 integrated graphics. Still 8 compute units, but they're the previous gen Vega instead of the latest RDNA 2. So that makes for a relatively large difference.
And what you're going to
Uh,
notice is that's going to be the big difference when we get to our performance numbers later. Is that the RDNA2 graphics, as you know very well, Jared, are like are AMD's latest. It's what you find in comparable consoles like PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, as well as GPUs that are on the market now. Vega is an old technology, and that ends up making a pretty big difference, despite the fact that the CPU is a little stronger.
yeah, Vega, like it launched in 2016, 2017, something like that. Uh, the Vega desktop cards are actually slightly different from the Vega integrated graphics, but they've gone through iterations over the years, mostly focused on boosting clock speeds. Like the original Vega integrated graphics was they had the Vega 11 and the Vega
Right.
10 and the Vega 8, I think, or maybe 7. They had several models. I think the top configuration actually had 12 compute units, but one was disabled, or maybe it was always 11 as the maximum. But then they updated to a later iteration, and they decided to only do 8 compute units, which was always sort of interesting. They clocked them higher, so it was still faster than the old Vega 11, but it wasn't a massive increase. Other specs, I mean, like this is the loaded up everything but the kitchen sink, or maybe even with the kitchen sink. You got 32 gigabytes of memory and a 2 terabyte. I mean, that's pretty hunkin' SSD. The screen is the same. Is it the same as the Steam Deck
So
or?
all of the specs are the same. I haven't accounted for whether or not it's the same manufacturer or anything like that. The one difference in the screen that you'll notice if you use them, it's hard to see through here, is that the Steam Deck, when you get the top configuration, which is what you have the specs there, like the 512 gigabyte model, it has this etched glass that helps prevent glare. And that's not on the 256 or the 64 gigabyte model. You don't get the etched glass on the Io Next or anything like that. It's in fact, you can see here, it's like a lot more reflective just on the camera. And that's really the difference. Otherwise, you get 1280 by 800, 16 by 10, 60 hertz touchscreens.
Oops, wrong layout. There we go. And the other thing to note is, like, even though the screen is the same size, the Steam Deck is actually quite a bit larger in dimensions in terms of
Yeah.
width.
Oh
So
yeah,
if
the
you
Steam Deck is huge in comparisons in terms of width.
yeah, so it's like an inch and a half wider.
Yeah,
Um,
look at
just
this.
flipping back. How do they feel in the hand, though? I mean, like, you know, bigger
Sure.
isn't necessarily worse.
Right. I mean, the thing about the Steam Deck that I've noticed in my use of it, and I've been using it longer, is that, it's big, but it's actually not that heavy. I mean, but its size means it's hard to fit in a bag, right? Like I want to take it, it comes with a carrying case, I'm gonna put it in the carrying case, and it's kind of a whopper. The big thing really that you get with it though is ergonomics. You have these big handles that Valve's put on the side for these buttons that are on the back, and they really give you a place to grip. Like it feels really natural. You have triggers like a controller. I mean, they did some weird stuff, right? Like they stretched it out, they put the D-pad and the buttons on the side. Those take time to get used to, but they're not a problem. The length also makes room for the directional pad. The Io Neo Next really shrank it down, right? So you have it's much, you get like again, like you get like a good inch on it. But obviously you don't have the you don't have the touch pads. Those don't exist. That's really about a Valve thing. You have a more console like this is more like an Xbox, right? You have where they're adjusted and you can have your thumbs on one and then you switch them. So that's kind of nice. The triggers are a little oddly shaped. I mean, they still do fundamentally the same thing, but I prefer what like the ones that just go straight in. And on the back, you don't get that length. Like there, you could see from the side here, like these little bumps, which
Yeah.
are like reminiscent of a controller, but I didn't feel as much like I knew where to put my fingers. And I don't necessarily care so much about the back buttons. Like I'm not going to be playing games at like some professional level that I need customizable back buttons on here. But that really helps with like heat in the way. When you have the Steam Deck and you have these vents on the side, this tells me, hey, keep your hands away from the vents, right? And on this, I mean, I largely didn't touch the vent. My hands aren't huge, but like I could like rest my fingers here. It's not enough to make or break it.
How
But I mean,
hot
yeah.
does how hot do they get, like, when you're using them? Are they uncomfortably warm by the vent, or is it not a big deal?
So these are the intake vents actually on the back.
Oh, okay.
So not real. It's not really a problem. Um, I think the Ion Neo Next, I noticed it maybe a teeny bit more because the Steam Deck like took such care to be like, put your fingers here. But on both of them, they have exhaust that comes out the top, so it's really not that big a problem.
So let's see. Let's go back to the slides here.
Right. In fact, it's very much like here. This is a Nintendo Switch. If you wanted Ion Neo comparison,
which
right?
is smaller than all of the others, right?
Yeah.
Actually, yeah,
This is the original Switch. It's significantly thinner, lighter, smaller, but it does a very similar thing where it just exhausts out the top.
yeah. So let's see. We've pretty much covered the specs. I guess there's a few other things that we skipped over, like Wi-Fi. I guess the Aya maybe has a newer Wi-Fi. It's Wi-Fi
So what it
6E.
does, yeah, they get Wi-Fi 6.
Battery size is slightly larger, but that's partly because it's a little more power hungry.
Right.
It comes with Windows 10. That's going to be probably the biggest difference, right? Is that Steam Deck, you can put Windows on it, but it comes with SteamOS
With SteamOS.
3.0. Yeah.
Right.
So
So
let's
yeah,
see.
it comes with Windows 10, which is a plus, which is a plus in some ways. In fact, I think that's really a selling point for a lot of people who want Windows because everything is compatible with Windows. One of the big issues we had reviewing the Steam Deck is that hey, some games just don't work. Even some Steam games just don't work. And um, Steam's been doing a lot of work with Proton, and many more games have been verified since our review. But there are some things that are that were harder to do at first. Like they're continuing to work on it, but you get something with Windows on it, you can do cloud gaming. You can run Xbox Game Pass if you have a subscription. Every game that runs on Windows, whether and you through
Yeah, and you
Steam
don't
or
need
Epic,
Steam. You can do
right?
other services.
Right. Like for instance, on here now, like the actually like because I had wiped it and then I reset it, like all I have on here right now is Epic. And you could do that on the Steam Deck, but involves doing a little bit of work. And in this case, if I want to run Epic games, it's not hard. It's you just install like anything else on Windows.
Yep.
Now to
The big deal breaker, like, well, there's two issues with the Steam Deck. One is getting one, right?
Yeah. So yeah, here you go. Here's Epic Games. So there's the biggest issue with the Steam Deck is getting one right now, right? Like I would love to be able to tell everybody because the price I think for a lot of people for the Aya Neo is the deal breaker. That this one fully loaded is $1,665, which is a lot.
Yeah,
The
it's
cheapest,
$1,000 more than the Steam
right?
Deck high end version,
The
and
cheapest
you
one,
get more hardware in some ways. But
yeah, the cheapest one as of when I wrote the review was a 1 terabyte version with 16 gigabytes of RAM. That was like 1415, which is still a lot when the Steam Deck with 512 maxed out, 512 gigabytes of RAM maxed out is $649. And it comes with a carrying case, you know, so, and you get better gaming performance. So, that's a tough one. But the Ion Neo Next is in stock. Like you can go to Ioneo's website and order it, and it might take a while because I think it's shipping directly from China. But if you want something to run handheld PC experience now, this is something you can buy. And Valve can't say that. If you want to get on Valve, you got to put down your $5 deposit, get in the back of the line. And they've been shipping out a lot more. You've been getting a lot of emails, but some people don't want to wait. The other thing about this, besides that, is that it's smaller and you can get those bigger SSD sizes that when I tested the Steam Deck, I was constantly installing and uninstalling games.
yeah,
And
512
granted,
gig goes fast.
it goes fast, especially when you're testing. Admittedly, like if I'm using it, I'm not playing enough games at a time in my life that 512 is a problem. And you do get the SD card slot on there, which you don't get on the Aya Neo Next. Instead, you get a second USB Type C port, which is nice because you can charge either in the top or the bottom. But 2 terabytes is pretty luxurious. I mean, you're paying out the
Yeah,
nose for it, but you can install plenty of games. Like I installed like an entire test suite with room to spare on this thing. So
yeah.
that's sort
I
of
That's my test bed for my desktops. Is I have a 2 terabyte drive in there, and I've got, I think, what, 13 games? No, 14 games for sure, and it doesn't fill up 2 terabytes. And some of those are big. Dead
right.
Redemption 2, that's like 150 gig all on its own. So
So yeah,
yeah,
the other thing I guess is noting is not just hardware but software. The Steam Deck has Steam OS where it's like you know it's kind of a console design experience, right? Everything works. It's meant to be controlled with a joystick and buttons. Windows is not that case. But there is, and I know you have some stuff we'll go over later. Aya does have some of its own software. This is part of it called Aya Space and the Aya Quick Tool. Those do make it a
Aya
little more
Space.
like it.
It's like MySpace, but for Aya.
And so we'll get into that in a bit. But those are kind of some differences also. But yeah, the big ones: size, storage space, performance, and whether or not you can get one. And that's honestly the Aya Neo Next biggest reason for existing is that you can buy one today.
What's a like? What's the ETA on getting a Steam Deck if you hop on right now? Do we know, or is
Last I
Valve not
saw,
really saying?
no. They say the last I saw was like after Q3 2020. 2022. I'm
For
not sure
like
if that's
6
changed since
months,
I last looked.
basically.
And that's well, I mean, that's also pretty vague, right? Because that could mean Q4, that could mean Q1 next year. It's hard to
Yeah.
know.
It's just
I think
sometime
look, Valve
after.
would love, yeah, Valve would love to be selling one to everyone who wanted one immediately. Like I get why they're doing it. I think it's helped a little bit with scalping issues, but yeah, you're going to wait, and that's the silicon shortage for you, the everything
Yes.
shortage.
Yes, it takes time. It takes time. Let's see. Let's run through just product shots.
Yeah,
Main screen, your D-pad on the left-hand
yeah.
side, right-hand side.
And speaking of these buttons, one thing I will say about them while you're showing them is that they feel very different from the Steam Decks. They are all very clicky. It's like, in fact, I found the Steam Decks a little mushy at first, but like these ones, like they have some resistance to them, and that's also the case on the D-pad. I wouldn't want to use the D-pad for like a fighting game that requires like lots of dexterity. Like playing Soul Calibur with it is a nightmare. But if you're just doing like directional back and forth, something like Dead Cells, which I also played on it, like that's fine. But that was something that like, hey, like this is different, and that you get sort of different feedback from those.
Do does this support like a video output at all? Like I didn't see any port for that. You can't
Yeah, I
hook it
mean,
up to like an HDMI display, can you?
it does. I believe it does have support display out over USB Type C,
Okay.
just like the Steam Deck does. One thing
So
you also,
I
one
was
thing
gonna say
you,
there's a better shot of their sizes.
yeah. Oh, I was gonna say the other thing you passed over earlier is that one thing this has that the Steam Deck does not is it has a fingerprint reader, which I actually kind of dig because up until like last
Think
week
about that.
when I was up till when I was reviewing this, the Steam Deck didn't have any biometrics at all. It also didn't have any passwords. It was just pick and go. Like you logged into your Steam account. Since then, Steam has added a screen where you can put like a passcode lock on it. But this supports Windows Hello, so you can just turn it on, scan your finger, and go. And I kind of like that you get that kind of
Is this the
security.
fingerprint reader?
Yeah, it's on the power button. So
Oh,
if you're,
okay.
yeah,
I was like looking for it. I'm like, well, I don't see it, but okay, so it's part of the power button. That's pretty
yeah,
cool. Yeah. All right, so there's your triple shot, Steam and Aya. Tell me about Aya Space. Like, what is
okay.
the purpose of Aya Space? Is this Aya Space or is this just settings
So this is
widget?
one of three screens in ISpace, and I'm also going to open it up on here, not that you'll be able to see as well. And there's a sort of a home that you can have that you see. You have the section where it scans through your games library. So I have installed some games on here, and that's like its way to like sort of launch like Steam. I gotta say, it's actually pretty good at scanning through the majority sources. It's scanned through Xbox, it scans through Epic, it scans through Steam. You can add certain things when you set it up to be sure to look here. And then you have the rest of it is just sort of jammed in Assistant, and this is the part I found to be very confusing. I mean, things like usage status, it's pretty self-explanatory. How much your processor you're using, fan speeds. Then in the rest of it, it's just a bunch of buried menus. So
Well, I'm looking
there's
at the Aya Quick Tools and I'm like, what are those icons even supposed to show?
right. So the Aya Quick tool shows up when there's a dedicated button here for ISpace. And so you press it once and it pulls up Quick Tools. You hold it and it brings up the full thing. And so in Quick Tools you can do things like change the volume, change the brightness, enable FSR, change fan speeds, things like that. But yeah, you talk about those icons, and I think that's really funny because I went through a number of those icons not knowing what the heck they did. And that's a bit of a problem. There's really very little documentation on how to use iSpace, and a lot of things. If you were to pull that image back up, actually, you'll see are really buried in that under that INEO Evo sign where it's configure INEO. There's a ton of stuff in here, and you might not even know to
Go
look there
ahead.
because it doesn't
Yeah, I don't have that
no,
screenshot, I
well
guess.
no well you have it here, for instance, like that is like under configure INEO with the joystick calibration. That's all. There's a bunch of stuff in there, and then each of those menus has more stuff below it. That thing they call it a SWIC. Um, that thing is great and should be open by default. Steam Deck has, when you hold down a button, a bunch of shortcuts to say, hey, like hold down these triggers and these combinations to take screenshots or turn features on and off. Ends up That Swift lets you do it, but they've buried it. The same thing with
Yeah.
the custom key. They hide a whole bunch of things several layers deep. And so I found that, like, here's where, like, oh yeah, you can support the custom key. I had to go 3 menus in to find out where I could do that. So it's a little
As a
tough.
software programmer back in my previous life, like I get it. Like programmers are notorious for like burying things in menus because we're just
Right.
like trying to create the functionality. But it looks like no one ever took the time to say, "Hey,
Yeah.
we need to clean this up."
Yeah. So, I mean, in that way, you can get it to where you want it to be. I was able to get it where I had shortcuts for, like, for instance, I took a lot of screenshots while I was reviewing it, and I had easy, like, don't think screenshot configuration set up. You can do that, but you have to do a lot of testing to be like, oh, this is the one that brings up the keyboard and this does this. And so you can get
And
it
if you
there.
use it a lot, you'd get used to it probably.
Right. But it took me way more time to learn than SteamOS. And obviously they're building on top of Windows, right? They didn't just build something on their own. And then the other thing is that I think for some people that makes it a little more confusing is that, I mean, I know Aya is located, like a lot of them are located in Asia. They need to bring some people to A, make documentation, but B, take the documentation they have and do some translation on it. If you if you read their native documentation, it might be a little better, but some of the stuff they have here can be some of the English can be confusing, which I think makes it tougher for international customers to get used to it.
All right. Let's see. Questions. Well, let's see. Someone I saw, Ruber too, one of our regulars. What's the warranty and RMA experience like? I mean, that's kind of
Yeah.
a hard one to deal with just because we don't
Right.
usually send things back for RMA.
Right. Well, I can tell you a little bit about it from my research that I found interesting. Because one thing I want to know was, like, when you have a Steam Deck or a Nintendo Switch, you have a big known quantity behind it. You have an idea what something like that's going to be. The Ioneo Next has a 1-year warranty. But the thing I noticed about it is that they, at one point, they do a lot through Indiegogo, which may or may not tell you a lot. I can't tell you, oh, their RMA experience is great or not. One thing I found interesting was that there was one point where they had early backers and who got early hardware, and then they made an upgrade really soon after. And to their credit, they actually shipped upgrade kits to their early backers where they had made changes to the design so that those users could, like, take out the motherboards and the batteries and put them in the nicer shells with the nicer screens. To me, that suggests that they do support people who buy their stuff. That being said, I haven't gone through the warranty or RMA experience myself. So that's sort of like the your mileage may vary from any small company that is doing some of their business through their own store and some of their business through Indiegogo, which
It
is,
seems
you never
it's a
know.
little bit like the Apple model. They'll ship you a new case and shell for it because you already paid for two.
So, I
I mean,
mean,
like
yeah,
1600 is a big,
yeah.
like, obviously economies of scale are in Valve's favor.
So, I mean, yeah, that's the type of thing. Like, our warranty and RMA, when you have a big company, I don't know, and I think that's sort of the Indiegogo and small company warning. Like, you do have to take that type of thing into consideration, but we haven't tried it, so it's hard to say.
Comment confused council. Steam Deck looks like a Hans and Franz pumped up PSP.
If the PSP is dating yourself, then, like, we all have a real big problem. Like, that wasn't that long ago, was it? Um,
I hope not.
these all share a real similar design language. The PSP was ahead of its time. I'm going to say it. It was. But I mean, joysticks, buttons, they all kind of have that same vibe, and it largely works.
Using Windows isn't too bad. I assume like you've got a touch screen interface to do most of the important stuff.
Windows is clunky um on anything. It's clunky on the Steam Deck. It's clunky here. There are some drivers that come pre-installed when you buy it. You need to, if you reinstall Windows, you got to reinstall the drivers. But you can use on the Ioneo Next, you can use the left stick to move the mouse around. A is your left click, and then X is your right click, which is a little confusing to me because X is to the left of A.
I was gonna
But
say, I'm like, isn't that backwards?
it took me a while to figure it out. Or yes, you can use the touchscreen, which is important because, look, you could hook up a keyboard to it easy enough. Like I've been using, just like I did for the Steam Deck, using this banged up USB-C hub. This is a receiver for a keyboard that I use to do a lot of, like, oh, I want to install a lot of things. You could absolutely do that. That works too. You could connect to other controllers. And then yeah, like the one big thing you'll need is the digital keyboard when you're on your own, right? 'Cause like you're playing a
Right.
game and it says, "Hey, what's your name?" and you need to type it in. Things like that. That's you need those. And so Windows is clunky. I think it would be in Microsoft's great interest to create something perhaps with Xbox Game Bar that sort of gives you a SteamOS experience to
Yeah.
maybe that's all in the Xbox. That could all be in the Xbox app, but while SteamOS is only Steam, basically all your games are there. Well, here, you can put anything you want on it, but you don't get all your games in one place unless you use the IS-based software. I mean, you could also use. There are other launcher softwares out there, like Playnite is a fairly popular one. Like you can get it like this, but it's not the same. And I personally preferred using Windows, like going into my launchers, making sure games are updated. It works. It's clunky.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the Windows motto, right?
I
It
mean,
works. It's a bit clunky.
granted, like, look, if you were to use either Windows or KDE Plasma on the Steam Deck, you sort of have the same problem, is that these were
Yeah.
not designed for these types of things. I haven't put Windows 11 on either of them. I'm curious if that helps a little bit. Those have bigger touch points. They have tablet modes that like put things on the space bar, that
Or
separate
if
things
the
from the space
drivers
bar.
might
That
be worse on Windows 11.
I mean, hard to say.
You hope
Hard to
not.
say, but they this one, by the way, is like already eligible for Windows 11, and I think that just came out of beta for the Steam Deck, the Windows 11 FTPM. So
Yeah, so
you,
the IA has FTPM support out of like from the get go. You don't need to do anything special.
right. I mean, when I took this out of the box, I was surprised. It was like a fairly old in tech terms version of Windows, but as soon as I updated it, it was like, hey, you want Windows 11? Because like Windows 11's cool. And for the purpose of testing, we left it on Windows 10 because that's how people are getting the system.
Yeah, and I know from our commenters in the forums and such that most of us still prefer Windows 10 over Windows 11. And I count myself among them. I mean, my new test bed's got Windows 11 on it. It's not horrible, but
Yeah.
there's just little things where you're like, why'd they do this? Anyway, let's talk performance, shall we? I
Yes.
accidentally showed this a little bit earlier. Borderlands 3. So we've got, presets very low, low, medium, and high. I see you didn't dare go up to the ultra or badass settings.
I mean, so basically the way I've been testing these is starting them off on some pretty low settings and then saying, okay, how high can we go to get something reasonable that you can play at? So you could run this on, on ultra high or badass settings or whatever, but
It's
it's
going to be bad.
yeah, it's going to be bad. It's not worth it. Like we should be like the idea is to be realistic about
Yep.
how you can play on these APUs.
You
So
know,
I
and
mean, yeah,
when you consider like the Aya has Vega 8, the Steam Deck has basically RDNA 2
right.
8 CU. It's the two newer architecture, but maybe even three. I don't know. But it's really what it's about 50% faster here in Borderlands 3. Not like huge difference, but when you're looking at 50 versus almost 70 frames per second, you
Right.
get a smooth 60 FPS experience on the Steam Deck in a lot of games at low or very low, or basically the settings that you want to hit 60 FPS. It's possible.
Yeah. The other interesting thing here is like comparing it. Like, so we have Steam Deck with with Proton, but then also Steam Deck with Windows 10, and Borderlands happens to be one of those games where Windows 10 really makes a difference. Like
Yes.
going from 56 up to 68 at very low, or even from 51 to 56 at low, is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, and
So
that's
in
is that because of? I wonder if that's because of what do you call it? It's
Proton,
uh, yeah, Proton, or is it DRM stuff that has to be handled, or something's getting in the way. I guess maybe the quad core processor might be doing more work going through Proton.
yeah, I mean it
But
sort of depends on the games, but this one, I mean, obviously, in this one's scaled. The other important finding about Windows 10 here is that on high, you could like I consider 30 FPS to be like the bare minimum to be considered like playable all around, like sacrificing a certain amount of
yeah,
graphics to get. And so here, if you had the Steam Deck on Windows 10, you could ostensibly play it on high settings, whereas the Steam Deck using SteamOS you couldn't, and you definitely couldn't on the Ion Neo Next Pro.
Right. All right, let's see. Next game, Guardians of the Galaxy.
Sure, and Guardians of the Galaxy is a tough one for both of them. When I tried to run it on Windows, it just like threw a fit on the Steam Deck. So there's no numbers for that here. Both of them, again, like you don't get huge differences between low and medium, but this is the type of game that just like recent enough that both of these chips sort of struggled,
Yeah.
which I think is interesting to see. And also, this one's interesting just because it shows how close they were. The Steam
Yeah,
Deck,
you
like
almost wonder if like this is a game that hits the CPU a little more so that the IA closes the gap because it's got a faster CPU, but then it also trails because it has a slower GPU and it ends up balancing out to where they're almost tied.
but then you also have Proton again, so
Yeah.
that's always like in the back of your mind. But you continue to see like Proton actually has proven to be pretty good in terms of
Yeah.
like getting out of the way.
Horizon Zero Dawn. I mean,
Yeah, Horizon Zero
same
Dawn is a
story,
game.
right?
Same story. I think like the Steam Deck with Proton here, I think actually outshines a little more than it does for Borderlands. Like getting, like 7 to 10 frame per second increases just on Steam, never mind Windows, like on Steam OS over Neo Next Pro is, I think, pretty impressive. And in this case, like you could ostensibly play on the Steam Deck. Ultimate quality might be a stretch. Like if you're at 30 even on the benchmark, you're having some frames below, like
Right.
up to like the favorite quality level and still do it. Whereas you're going to want to stop at original on the Ion Next Pro.
One of the interesting things to consider here is like original quality is what it was at on the PlayStation 4, right?
Right.
And I
More
mean
or
the
less.
resolution is lower, but the overall quality is relatively similar. And it's like, I didn't play it on PlayStation 4 ever, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if 40 frames per second is pretty typical of what you saw of a lot of PlayStation 4 games that they wouldn't. I mean, more complex ones didn't go for 60 frames per second. They're like, it's an open world, third person's perspective. You can play at 30.
Yeah.
Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yeah. I mean, I think this one's an interesting one. And because, I mean, look, it's playable for all of them. Red Dead Redemption 2's benchmark is weird and then it kind of scales with your hardware. So we have it on its lowest. But I guess what's interesting here is that even at its lowest, Steam Deck actually did its best it did it better through Proton than it did through Windows, which is kind of weird. But again, like you just
It's
get
probably because
that.
Vulcan, right?
Yeah. I mean, we did test it through Vulkan, so that would explain it. And we did, again, like you just get those another like 10 to 12, and this is really just the difference you're getting in RDNA 2 versus Vega.
Yep. Shadow of the Tomb Raider. There's not as much of a gap there between Steam Deck on Windows and on
No, and
Steam OS,
well,
so that's
part
interesting.
part of the reason there is that Shadow of the Tomb Raider has a Linux version on Steam, which so you get to run that
That's
game
probably the explanation. Yep.
so you get to run that game natively. Now, what I found about this is that when I was doing the Steam Deck is, hey, like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, like this is a system, the Steam Deck, primarily like aimed at like games at like low and medium settings. Like admittedly, Shadow's a few years old, but it still has some pretty big effects.
You didn't
And
turn
so
on ray tracing, I bet.
no, we did not turn on ray tracing. Like you could play this in theory on its highest settings on the Steam Deck and be fine. Where again, like this is like a big difference where you get several, sometimes double-digit frame differences. And on Neo Next, you might want to keep this at lower medium. So
Right.
this kind of shows like even in games that are a few years older, like that's where you really see RDNA2 kind of come in and kick ass in a way that Vega just can't hang.
Yeah, you have to wonder, like, is Valve going to do an updated Steam Deck next year that has, the AMD's already talking about Zen 3 Plus paired with RDNA 3 or no, they're talking about Zen 4 paired with RDNA 3 in, I think it's their Phoenix architecture. So that'll be interesting to see if anything comes of that. Like if we get a Steam Deck version 2.0 that just like blows everything out of the water.
Yeah, I
Or
mean, I
maybe
think
Aya will be first out with one of those.
like most hardware, when is the question rather than if.
Yep.
But
Yep.
they have to first get through these orders. So we'll see how
Yeah,
long they.
yeah, they can't get stock yet, and we're talking about the next one. Finally, and then this is the non-gaming test, so we're looking at Geekbench. It's not necessarily the perfect representation of all performance, but
No.
we'll roll with it.
Yeah, so we tend to run these on our laptops just to get a general idea. And I think this is a fun test because if you look at all the games, it's like, yes, the Steam Deck's more powerful. It got higher scores across the board. In a couple places, the Iron Neo came close, but not in many. And then you get here in Geekbench, and this is where you see the difference between in cores. Both having newer cores and more cores. In that the Iron Neo Next Pro simply, I mean, again, like this is like a score that is sort of, it's like out of the program. It doesn't have inherent meaning other than being relative to each other, but they are higher. And that suggests if you were going to do some productivity work, like if in theory, if you wanted to carry this around like a little gaming nook and then hook it up to a desktop, then you would, and then maybe like open a bunch of browser tabs and, do some Excel spreadsheets or whatever, you'd probably have a better time on the Neo Next Pro than you would on the Steam Deck. I think that's a pretty niche use case, but I'm sure some people are going to do it. I
Yeah,
think
we
like
actually got a question from Confused Council. If it supports Windows, can I use it for productivity when traveling with a
yeah, I
portable
mean,
monitor?
you can
Yes.
absolutely, if you hook things up, it's got regular USB Type C. It has two ports, which is nice. In fact, it also comes in the box with two USB-C to USB-A adapters. You can, if you bring a dongle or something like that, you could put in even more stuff. Bring a mouse and keyboard. You could do it just like you could through KDE Plasma on the Steam Deck or Windows if you brought it. If that's going to be the best experience, I don't think so, but I'm sure there are hobbyists who are going to love like using a small thing like this to come up with all sorts of projects. Or I suppose like if you did want, like if this is all you had and just want to like check your email, like you could do it. One of the first things I did on the Steam Deck when I reviewed it was check my bank account just because I wanted to be able to say I did it. And there's no reason that you couldn't browse tomshardware.com, the PC website, PC reviewing website on a Steam Deck. You could absolutely do that.
Uh, same commenter, Confused Council. With that screen size and resolution, is there a noticeable difference at different quality settings in the games? As a gaming tester, like I do graphics
Yeah.
cards, and I can pretty much tell you that it comes down to the game in question. Like some games, it's going to be noticeable. There's a lot of games where the difference between medium, high, and even ultra is not significant, where you're like, wow, ultra runs half as fast, but does it look twice as good?
Yeah,
No.
I think that's when you notice from something like the Guardians of the Galaxy test, for instance, we're going up from low to medium. It's a difference of like 1 or 2 frames per second. So it sort of depends on the game, like Jared said, because for some games the difference is higher, like higher quality textures, but for others it means you're getting more other types of effects like lighting, right? So it's going to depend a lot on the game. The screen's small. I care a bit more about having a nicer running game to an extent. Like these have 60 hertz screens, so if I want to find whatever could run closest to 60 and just call it a day, but I could absolutely tell. I do understand there are people who don't care if their game runs like a slideshow as long as it's pretty.
Yeah, I mean the interesting thing with the Switch is just like, it's such low powered hardware compared to either
Yeah,
of these. I mean, it's
yeah,
it's a Kepler era 192 SM NVIDIA chip that runs the Switch, if I remember right.
yeah. The Switch is showing its age. I recently played Kirby on it, as you can see here, and like Kirby games are not known as being huge, like giant, like power suckers. But there were a couple points where they had like a lot of effects where it slowed down a little, and I noticed it. So we are Nintendo. You're due for a refresh.
Yeah, it feels like that. I mean, when did the Switch come out? It's been 4 years, 5 years.
I think we're coming close. I should know this off the top of my head, but we're coming up closer to 5 years.
It's not a
And
GPU, so I don't know.
but yeah, I mean it's getting to be an older machine. I mean, granted, there are some things that I hold the Eye Neo next, and I'm like, I wish this was as thin or as light as the Nintendo Switch. It's easy to toss in my bag. Like, I mean, the thickness differences. I mean, the Switch has always felt a little flimsy, especially because the Joy-Cons detach. But this is really light, and the Neo Next, despite being thinner, I mean, besides like thinner this way than the Steam Deck, it's actually a little heavier. So these are the types of things you got to keep in mind. The sort of like little trade-offs you keep in mind when you're in this space is the new one has become weight and size.
Yeah, Ruler2 makes comment about the gaming stuff. Nintendo uses simple cartoon graphics so the Switch can still look good 10 years from now. I mean, it's true. Like, if you go for realistic looking PC games
Right.
or console games, you know, if you're playing a Call of Duty or something where it tries to look realistic to some degree, those are going to be a lot more difficult to do. Whereas, like, I mean, the only console I have in my house is the original Nintendo Wii, and my kids still play Mario Kart on it with me, and Super Smash Brothers Brawl, something like that. And it doesn't really
Yeah.
matter that the graphics aren't state of the art. Like, it can still
Right.
be fun.
Yeah.
I
I
do
mean,
have to wonder, like, Windows supports ARM now, and you have to wonder, like, will someone like Qualcomm do a chip that has better graphics and still is low power
they've
that,
actually already, yeah, they've already announced their gaming chip. Qualcomm announced it a few months back. They're
right.
working with Razer on a sort of prototype that doesn't look totally unlike one of these. The idea is that if like they could find developers to work on ARM, they could do it. The other big thing is cloud gaming. When you bring up the Switch being old, there are some games being used. Like for instance, Control is a game that I really love, and played it on PC. But if you got it on the Switch, they have a cloud version, and you have a small amount of the game on the Switch locally, but then to play the rest, you have to have an internet connection. It's
Oh,
not
interesting.
ideal. It's not ideal. Not really a way to play it on the go, but like all of these are sort of like all of these are potential Xbox Game Pass, or I'm not going to say Stadia, but like Nvidia GeForce Now options, right? That you can obviously we went over benchmarks for local gaming, but you could also, as long as you have the right hardware and the right support from whoever's making it, use one of those as well to augment what you're doing. So power is important, but if you have the cloud gaming stuff, you can also maybe squeeze a couple of extra years out of it, as a few extra games have done on the Switch.
What's battery like life battery life like, there we go, on the Aya versus the
Um,
Steam, like
right.
when you're playing games?
Sure. So I got to preface this with that we don't have like a standard test for these, and they're going to matter so much based on the game you're playing, the settings you used. What I did is I left it on its 15-watt balanced mode. They do have a 20-watt game mode, but I did all the testing on the 15-watt balanced mode as the default out of the box. Set the screen to 50% because the screen's really bright. 50% was fine. The answer was not great, actually. I on like Cyberpunk, like I came on and off back to it, and maybe it lasted like around 2 hours, and then Dead Cells, I just kind of like played straight through, and like I hit the 10% like Windows like you need to plug in thing around 2 hours. So this is definitely one where you want to bring the charger with you and want to turn the screen brightness down. And it's possible if you turn the screen brightness down, turn off things like Bluetooth, you'll get more stuff out of it. But I definitely found, and then the battery in the Steam Deck was one that lasted longer with similar settings. So,
Did you test Steam Deck under Windows as well as Steam OS with battery life? Was there a difference there?
not that I don't believe we did the battery life on Windows. No,
Because I
not at
kind
that
of
time.
wonder
That
if Windows on a
Yeah.
Steam Deck might actually use more power and kill the battery faster.
It's potential does. I mean, my thought on the Steam Deck, and from what I've seen, like looking at what the community is talking about, is most people are using Steam OS. So it's probably
Yeah.
the best way to test these things at the moment. Also, because at the moment there's no dual booting. You kind of have to choose one or the other, unless you put like Windows or Steam OS on an SD card, which you could do.
All right. Any other questions? It doesn't look like it. Any other comments, Andrew? Like, what's your overall opinion of Aya Next? Like, is it worth it? Is it just a
I mean,
niche device?
I mean, I think the Steam Deck's a niche device too, despite how well it's selling. Right? I think it depends. A, how much money you're willing to spend, and B, how much you want to be in this space. This is smaller than the Steam Deck. So if you have a smaller hands, it's plus. I like that it has the two USB-C ports, and I don't have to worry about the SD card because it has 2 TB of storage. Those are things the Steam Deck hasn't yet added. I could absolutely see Valve saying, hey, we're selling these like hotcakes. I bet people would pay more for a 1 TB or a 2 TB option. But at the moment, you can't get one at all. So I would say that if you really want to be in this space, you want something a little bit smaller and storage really matters to you, like there's your case for the Aya Neo Next. But I think for most people, I would say that if you really want to like be in the new PC gaming on the go revolution, that you could save a lot of money on the Steam Deck and get better performance. And to me, that's worth it. But you're going to have to wait. I think you should wait. Like I would tell most people you should probably wait. Aya has already announced their next one. I believe it's like the Aya Neo Air, which they say they're going to bring the price down on. They have not announced the price. But I mean, I think the fact that they're saying that is good. That means the Steam Deck has really brought competition into this space. And whether you're Aya or One X player or anyone else who's been making one of these for a few years, now that the Steam Deck has legitimized it, because look, the Steam Deck was not the first one in the space. It's just the one everyone's comparing things to now.
Right.
Then if they do lower that price, like we could talk again. But unless you absolutely need that better CPU power for, I don't know, reasons on the go, I would say you should put down your $5, be patient, and get this system that's slowly improving every day. And by the time you get it, you're probably going to have a ton more features, because it's just hard to tell anyone not to pay so much more for so much less gaming power.
Yeah, and the reality is, I mean, like Valve makes a ton of money off of Steam. Like they
Right.
can
I mean,
subsidize the Steam Deck pretty easily.
right. That's probably where the price comes from, is that once you get on here, if you don't install Windows, like most people probably won't, every game you pay for, Valve gets a cut. That's not the case in the Aya Neo Next. They obviously probably not as big a manufacturer. They've put together something that feels incredibly solid for the size company they are, but it's very expensive. And so if you can justify that, all the power to you. You're going to get a solid piece of hardware, but it's very expensive, and some of the gaming already feels a little outdated. So if you can wait, if you have patience, then wait. If not, 2 TB is nice.
Yeah. I mean, you also have to wonder, it's like, well, what if you get a Steam Deck and a $600, $800 laptop? Then you have the Steam Deck on the go and you've got a better computer at home. Or you build $1,000 desktop and, have a much better at-home experience. So it is very difficult to stomach that price increase going from Steam Deck to Aya. But, some people, they are on the go enough that they say, yeah, it's worth it to me. I'm not one of them. I'm a bit of a hermit. I live in my man cave with all my testing equipment. I don't even hardly use laptops because I haven't gone to a trade show or an event in like 2.5 years. But
I will say is that I'm a person, when I first got the Switch, was surprised at how much I play the Switch detached, even when I'm at home. And I found out like that's part of why I like the Steam Deck. Sometimes I just like to get on the couch, have a cup of tea, and play some games and just feel nice and cozy. So there's a reason there. But again, $650 is a lot for the 512 GB model. It's a lot of money, but it's cheap in comparison to the Aya Neo Next, even at its most base. So I hope Aya keeps going. I hope they keep pushing this, but I also hope they make this much cheaper. And that's gonna be hard because they don't sell games.
Yep. The great thing about both the Steam Deck and the Aya Neo, and this is something you don't get with a Nintendo Switch, is if you're a PC gamer, a longtime PC gamer, your whole library pretty much comes with you.
The joke about the Steam Deck was that it had the best launch lineup of all time.
Yeah.
And that there were no new games, but it had almost every big PC game ever, besides anything that was Epic exclusive or.
You want to play something from 1990s? You can do it. All right. Well, I think that about does it. Oh, someone asked this. ASUS makes detachable for the phone. Oh, sorry. Other question. good gaming phone, Asus ROG Phone 5. Like, does that really compete with either of these, Steam Deck or Aya?
I think that's a completely different category. I mean, the gaming phones in the US where you and I are they're not a huge market. There are markets overseas in parts of Europe and Asia where gaming phones sell a lot and people really care about the specs to play mobile games. Here in the US, that's not such a thing, but you could use something like an RG Phone 5 or really any phone for cloud gaming. You could do that. You could get something like a Razer Kishi or for iOS for iPhones a backbone, and you could play games on that. That includes cloud gaming. That includes like iOS and Android games. But I think the real appeal of something like the Aya Neo Next or the Steam Deck is that you get your whole PC library, like real AAA titles, and that you can play them locally. So it kind of feels like I get where you're going. You can absolutely game on the go. Android and iOS both have great libraries of certain types of games, and they can both do streaming to some degree. So I mean that's great, but it's not the same as having like a dedicated device that plays all of your PC games. Like if you're a hardcore PC gamer, like you're going to want one of these. If you want to play on the go, you can also play at home and be happy there too.
All right, I think that does it for us.
Okay.
Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with We Don't Talk About Bruno. I can't tell you what we'll be back with next week. But tune in and we'll have something exciting to discuss. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See you.